Welcome to the Body Peace Podcast, formerly known as Her Story on a Plate. This podcast has always been a space for deep, nuanced conversations about food, body image, and the stories our bodies carry. But as conversations have grown, so has our mission.
That's why this is now the Body Peace Podcast, a name that reflects what we're truly here for, helping you step off the battlefield with your body and move toward more compassion, connection, and ease.
Each episode will bring real, honest dialogue with your hosts, me, I'm Jennie Kramer,
and me, Nina Manelson. We'll also be joined by guests whose personal stories and professional wisdom offer new ways of thinking, feeling, and being in your body.
We're so glad you're here. Welcome to the Body Peace Podcast. Hi, Nina. Hi, everyone.
Hi, Jennie.
Always nice to see you, and certainly lovely to have our listeners listen in. Today, I think we want to sort of address what it's like to live in our world right now, right? There's a lot of things going on. It almost doesn't matter where you are on your own personal, political, worldview spectrum. Everyone, I think, is experiencing some dis-ease, dysfunction, something where they're feeling uncomfortable. And so we wanted to talk about that a little bit. And really give you some ways to manage it, but also ways to just be with it. And of course, because of the focus of our podcast usually, to ultimately find out how do you experience that in your body and how do you manage it in a way that doesn't necessarily hurt your body. So that's sort of the landscape, I think, for today.
Yeah, and also how does it impact your relationship with your eating? How does it impact your relationship with your reflection in the mirror? And I'll just start it off from a very personal space is since October 7th, I have been stressed. And when the stress ramps up, right, we've got fires. My mom has a place in Florida. There's been 3 hurricanes in the last couple of years. My daughter lives in Israel. I worry. There's just so much going on. And when the stress cranks up, I watch a very loud old voice get activated. And how it shows up is I'll be getting dressed in the morning and there's a mirror and suddenly that voice comes up and goes, "Really? Those thighs?" Literally, that is a voice from my 10-year-old self, who all the other girls in my grade had a different body shape, and they wore these little shorts in gym, and their thighs didn't go smush at the bottom of their shorts. But those are my thighs. Those have been my thighs my entire life. That is just the genetic shape of my body. And at this age and stage, I can be dear and tender and kind to the actual genetic body shape that I have. But when I get stressed, what gets activated is the critical mind, the critical parts of me. And so I want to weave that in is how do we treat ourselves? What are the signs and symptoms that tell us, wow, I have a stressed out system and I'm getting activated and it's showing up in my relationship with my body. It's showing up in my relationship with food.
It's so interesting you say this, the critical mind, right? I mean, what I'm hearing from most folks, and I'm probably experiencing it myself, is that the critical mind is also about, why am I focusing on these things? There are things in the world that are much more important than all of this. And actually, that's not true. It's what you're experiencing in your body, right?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, at the time of our recording this, right, the fires in LA are just, they're roaring and people are losing people and property and lifestyle. I mean, just everything you can imagine, right? There's certainly unrest in the Middle East. There's potential unrest given that the transition of our government is about to take place next week as we record this. And, those thoughts are in my head. Like, I'm thinking about those things. And what I notice is that suddenly I'm thinking about them a lot more than I ever did. Like, they're sort of part of my daily bandwidth. Like, there's just an awareness of them, right? So your version is I look in the mirror and I see or notice or talk about the things that I don't usually talk about. My version of it is that I can feel the, I'll call it anxiety, nervousness in my body. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
I'm fully functional. I do all the things I need to do. Hopefully, I do them well. And I have an awareness that there's something that's unsettled. And
Yeah.
yeah, and it's sort of like the butterflies in the stomach, the usual fight or flight or flee physical experiences that many of us have. And that has an impact on, for all of us, on appetite, on mood, on so many things. And so
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, and what you're talking about is what happens when our nervous system is revved, right? What happens when when animals get their fur up in in the back of their neck?
Yeah.
What happens when we're going around with our fur up all the time? What's the impact? And part of it is what you're saying, Jenny, is like naming it. Oh, wow, I am on high alert all the time. And, one of the things that I love sort of I'm appreciating right now about our wellness culture is there's a lot more of a conversation about nervous system.
Yes.
But right now, how it's occurring to me in our culture, what's coming at a nervous system is, oh, your nervous system is too activated, it's toxic, do something about it. And then it becomes like, oh, your body is not the right size, do something about it.
Very good.
That's not helpful. It's
Right.
just one more thing to feel like we're doing wrong.
So yeah, so let's divide this into two pieces, right? One is, let's say you are actually actively in the middle of a crisis, whether
Yeah.
you're in the LA fires or just a personal crisis, whatever it may be, right? I think the first rule of thumb is to really give yourself a break and to
Hmm.
really support yourself the way you would support another, the way you would support someone you love, the way you would support a friend. I promise you that if a friend was going through something, you would not say to them, well, just snap right up. You're being an idiot. You would never do that. You
Yeah.
would be compassionate and empathetic. You'd be curious. And I think that's sort of the start of how we start to be kinder to ourselves so that a lot of those old conversations don't necessarily surface.
I absolutely agree. And I think there's one step before
Mm.
jumping into kindness. And I'm saying this from my own experience as well as
Oh,
sitting with clients in it, is I'm remembering when my son was in a big mental health crisis. And I'm not talking out of turn. He speaks about it publicly in order to help others.
yes.
So he was going through a big mental health crisis. And my friends would say, how are you? And what came out of my mouth over and over is this is brutal. This is so hard. And
Yes.
before I could get to a place of gentleness with myself, I just had to sit with, wow, this is hard. And it reminds me also when I was driving on to Sanibel Island, which is where my mom has a place, and it was right after Hurricane Ian. They had just opened the bridge back to the island. And the whole drive over the causeway through the island, all I could say was, oh my God, oh my God. There's a
Yep.
moment of just sitting in the destruction. There's a moment in sitting in the hard that then says, it's not jumping out like, okay, now I'm going to get into action. Okay, now I have to be really gentle. But being with this is is heartbreaking. This is brutal. This is soul crushing. Whatever that your experience. For me, my shorthand is this is hard. And then that can help us trigger, oh, this is hard. If I had a friend who was going through a hard time, I would go,
Yeah, and it takes something, you're right on target. It takes something to acknowledge that you're feeling what you're feeling. I think
yes,
people go through this thing like, well, I shouldn't be feeling this because, what does it mean? Does it mean I'm weak? Does it mean that I don't have resilience? Of course you do. What it means is that you've been overwhelmed by something. You can be overwhelmed by a personal experience, which you've been generous enough to share, but you can also be overwhelmed by events that are outside of you, right? I mean, as we watch things that unfold in the world, right? To that I say, do yourself a favor and get your news sources from a variety of places so that you can use your reasonable mind, your wise mind to just sort of discern, okay, what makes sense to me? What am I really reacting to? Then there's the more local stuff, which is whatever's happening, obviously, in your world. It reminds me of the conversation that we've had on this program about grief. Well, grief comes in these waves. Most people think of grief as just, the loss of a life, the loss of a person, which of course it is. But grief has such a bigger meaning. And I often find that it's present when we're in crisis. The grief is about, something that we thought would be and isn't, or something that used to be and isn't, or
Yeah.
something that has been and maybe never will be again. That is its own form of grief, and it
Yeah.
can stimulate the same physical and emotional sensations that in fact may lead to a binge, a restrictive period, anything related to food. I mean, it certainly can lead to other behaviors that in the moment feel like they're going to be helpful and in the long run don't. Uh,
Yeah.
so you have to be, again, there is a kindness that's necessary.
But I think linking those two, crisis and grief, Jenny, is so important because when we're in crisis, there's shock,
Mm.
right? And it makes me think of the videos I've been watching about people after the fires, people sitting by the rubble
Yes.
and what they're saying.
Right.
And what they're in is both shock, crisis,
Yes.
fear, right, about everything, and grief, that connection. And those are all very difficult feelings to allow ourselves to
Yes.
feel. They're uncomfortable. It brings us back to what you were saying in the very beginning, how crisis pushes us
Yes.
to sit into discomfort. And for most women who are struggling with food and body issues, discomfort is no fun. And so food or unwanted eating behaviors has become like my buddy. Here's my food, my buddy, right? I've worked with many clients who are like, I have, it's late at night and I am lonely. I don't want to feel lonely. Here's my buddy, food, who will be with us.
But
So
it's a fickle friend.
it is a
Right.
fickle
Right.
friend.
Because, in the moment it feels like, well, all right, this feels familiar. This will soothe me. This will numb me. This will be my time. This is how I'll spend my time alone. This is great, all that. And within short order, it's followed with some regret and maybe physical discomfort and all kinds of other things. But I do think that, again, it's about just being kind. I mean, feel your feelings, allow yourself to feel them. And if you think that you're feeling unreasonable feelings, or if you feel like you're being a baby, or whatever your version of that is, that's when it's also important to click into a community, right? Community of whether it's friends, family, people that you trust, whether it's a treatment community, whether it's a podcast community, but I mean, just any kind of community so that you can check in and say, oh, that's right, I'm not crazy. There are lots of people who go through what I go through, have similar thoughts, have similar behaviors. And by the way, we're all human. At the end
Yeah.
of the day, that's all we are, is human with a variety of experiences and thoughts and feelings. And that's what I mean by the compassion. You're right on when you say, look, and notice it, right? Notice what's happening.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. One of the things you said is, feel your feelings.
Yes.
In my early 20s, if you had said that, I'd be like, okay, there's sad and there's happy. And it took me literally, I'm not exaggerating or making this up at all, opening a book. I think it was Melody Beattie's Codependent No More book that I was in my 20s, and looked at the list of feelings, and I was like, you're allowed to have all these different kinds of feelings.
Right.
And so it is to be able to name, to be able to put words. That's why being in community, like you're saying, Jenny, is so important, because other people start talking and you're like, yes, I too feel disappointed. Too feel angry, let down, grieving, all the things.
There are those who would say, and I will say that I don't agree with the point of view, but there are those who would say that being in community is just a way to commiserate and I don't need more of the same.
Mm,
Being in community also allows you, first of all, to find words for it,
mhm.
which is an important part of it, but also to look for solutions together, to look for ways to cope together. It's just, 12 heads are always better than one. And so
Yeah.
if you can allow yourself the vulnerability of sharing yourself with others and being able to listen to them, I think community is a very important thing. And it's not even just to sit around and talk. Sometimes a community is just like, okay, these are my really good friends. Um, let's all just, gather, let's have some dinner together, just something to feel like you're part of something, that you're
Yeah.
not alone in your grief or your feelings or your fears or your anxiety or whatever they may be. I mean, food, after all, is also meant to be cultural and aesthetic and not anesthetic and aesthetic and
Hmm.
and it's meant, well, it can be anesthetic to some, and and it's also meant to bring people together. I mean, that's
Yeah.
the point. We
Yeah.
avoid it in some ways, but that's kind of one of its purposes.
Yeah. And one of the things about community, you're talking about the power of community, and one of them is that when we're in community, our natural kindness, open hearted, compassionate way pours out towards others and it models for us how to be with ourselves because it comes naturally. I can be like, oh, Jenny's going through this thing. And of course that's hard. And I really get that. And suddenly I am actually being compassionate in the very way that I need to be with myself. Or we see somebody else say, oh, Jenny, me too. I totally understand. It's really hard to go through things like this. And I go, oh, that's what compassion looks like. Because so few of us have a model for what compassion and being kind to ourselves really sounds like, really looks like, really feels like. And when we're in community, bam, there's the model for us.
Yes, absolutely. I'll add another thought too, which is, we've done a couple of episodes, one with Kim Daniels and one with Jean Catanzaro, about this idea of parts of
Mm-hmm.
us, right? They're young parts, they're old parts, they're parts of us that respond in the way that they do. And when we look at it through this lens, which we call IFS or internal family systems, we start to really understand all the parts of ourselves because they all have a use, they all have a value, they all have a basis in some other part of our upbringing, in our lives, in our past. I think when we come in touch with them very quickly um, and readily, I think it makes it easier to be self-compassionate.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So go back to those episodes. If you haven't heard them, you should have by now. Yeah. Yeah.
But
Um,
I want to weave back in because you brought it up again is when we're in times of crisis, when we're in times of high stress,
yeah.
what happens with our relationship with food and body? What, where do we, where do we get a little sort of unstable with ourselves?
I think one of the things that I hear all the time
Mm-hmm.
is the words "what if." What if is a big trigger because what if that happens? And what if that? And what if that doesn't happen? And what if that, what? And we literally get anxious and revved because why? These things are not knowable. They are not in our control. We tend to think about the worst possible outcome rather than the best possible outcome. So imagine if you're swirling in, well, what if that happens? But what if that? And what if that? Imagine if you can sort of come up with, well, what would be the best possible outcome? Okay, well, I know I can imagine the worst, but what would be the best possible outcome? And can I imagine some continuum so that I'm not automatically going to just what I think is going to be the worst one when the truth is I don't even really know because these things are not always in our control, right? There are
Yeah.
things external to us that make us very anxious, very upset, grievous, angry, sad. I mean, the whole wheel of emotions. So the what keeping the what if in check is more about, all right, what is it that what do I know? What do I actually know to be so? I find that it's a very grounding thing to do.
So when you said that, it's a very grounding thing to do,
Mm,
right? What you're saying is come back into what is concrete, what is this moment, which is a very Buddhist, be in this moment.
yes.
And when we're reaching for the potato chips, the crunchy, or the mashed potatoes and the macaroni and cheese, the super comforting, there's also an attempt, and it's really important always for us to look at some of the places where we're giving ourselves a hard time around food. What was the intention? The intention was grounding. I
Mm,
want to feel grounded. I'm in fear. I'm in the what if. I'm in the agitation. I'm in the sort of spiky hair, fur up.
mhm.
And you know what? If I eat, whoop, it turns it down. If I eat, I'm going to get grounded. And so to look at how am I in times of crisis? How am I grounding myself?
Well,
Because if we don't, we're going to look for what's convenient, which is often whatever food. And I'm not saying that eating to support us emotionally is a bad thing. We're emotional people. We're allowed to eat emotionally. I'm not vilifying that one bit.
sure.
We just want to have choice around it.
Yeah, and it's important to mention that there are other behaviors that come about too, right? It's what we'll call an overeating moment or a binge moment. There's also people that can run to alcohol. There are
Yeah.
people that run to lots of other kinds of behaviors. Again, to your point, meant to ground us in some way, but also meant to numb us. And those two things don't go together so well. Because the grounding, to give you an example, my favorite example of grounding, which is hard to do if you live in the Northeast in the winter. But at other times of the year, my favorite example is what we call earthing. When you take your shoes off and you walk, let's say, through soft grass, and you really allow the earth to be sort of under your feet. There's a million different versions of that. That's just my favorite one. And you really allow your feet to feel it, and it's almost like the it sounds airy fairy, but the vibrations of the earth and the world just sort of come through you.
Mm-hmm.
So there's a moment of connectedness, moment of freedom.
Yeah,
Uh,
it's woo in the best of ways. Mm-hmm.
for sure. And so, there are other ways to do that. I mean, you can do it in the snow too. God bless. But, the idea is to be grounded, meaning, okay, I'm part of something bigger.
Yeah.
I'm part of something, whether it's family, neighborhood, workspace, country, world. I mean, take it out as far as you want. But to
Yeah.
be part of community, I think, is an important part of
Yeah.
grounding.
It
Yeah.
is.
Yeah.
There was a sort of a literal grounding that I used to do every time I would travel. Like I'd get off a plane, I'd come home, and I'd walk into the kitchen and start eating, eating, eating. And I'd be like, I wasn't even hungry. I like literally had a meal just not too long ago.
Mm.
And why am I eating at this moment? And suddenly it was like this like light bulb, and I was like, of course, I've actually been up in the air, not grounded at all. And I am trying to get my feet back on the earth.
That's great.
I am trying to ground myself. And so I was like, so how do I want to do this? Because it's something I actually need when I get off a plane to feel like, yep, back planted on this planet. So, what I found to be very helpful, and I am a watery type of human, is start drinking water like crazy. Walk into the kitchen, get myself a glass of water, make myself a cup of tea. And that is historically has also been my way of connecting to nature. I love swimming. I love swimming outside. I love swimming in Walden Pond. So for me, water is that walking barefoot as a little more accessible in the winter.
That's true.
So it's to look at where are those places where I need solid
Mm.
ground, where I need a sense of connection to the planet.
I'll tell you where I find my grounding year round, no matter what the weather, no matter what the time of day, no matter what the
I
circumstance.
know what you're going to say.
Do you? Don't make me sing it. No, but it's music. Music
Mhm.
is, I think, the universal language. Doesn't matter what kind. It's whatever moves you. It's whatever, brings about that sort of solar plexus moment where you feel the vibration of it, the rhythm of it. And, depending on what you love and depending on what you choose, um, it can actually ground you just because it's almost a predictable rhythm. If there's music that you love, have it on cue, have it ready. And, I have lots of folks that do this all throughout the day. Usually you can get grounded by music in about 3 minutes. That's all it takes. Is to
That's
hear
amazing.
something in a quiet place, put your AirPods in or whatever you have and just take it and let it wash over you. If you're comfortable wherever you are, hopefully not driving, close your eyes and just take it in, because I think it's just a remarkable reset. Now you might say, well, all right, but that's not going to solve the problems of the world. No, neither. Neither will a loss of sleep because you're anxious and upset. Neither will somehow, making yourself feel sick from any variety of behaviors. But I think it puts us all in a better position to manage, to come up with solutions if that need be the case, to just be in this world and allow time to go by and see what the outcomes are. Grounding, I think, is really at the heart of it. Yeah.
It is. And Jenny, it wasn't what I thought you were going to say.
Oh, what did you think I was going to say?
I thought you were going to say Jedi. Your
Oh, my little doggy.
dog.
My little doggy, yes. My little 5.3-pound Yorkie who thinks he's a German Shepherd. That one, yes.
That one.
Yes, now
But
that is
again,
grounding too.
it is grounding, right? When we're with animals,
Right.
when we're petting a dog, literally getting their fur down. When we're petting a cat, literally getting their fur down. That's what we want for ourselves.
Yes. And if you prefer a turtle, go for it. The point then is to just make the connection. Yes.
Right. So I want to do the wrap up, which is in a place of crisis, right? One is to go, wow, this is hard, right? Where am I right now? It's like a GPS. Find out where you are in the moment. This is hard. Then start identifying the feelings.
Yes.
I am afraid. I am having grief. I am angry. Making space for it. And then finding ways to be with it all. And the ways that we talked about being with it all are community and grounding. And in community comes compassion.
Yes.
And in grounding, we talked about being on the earth. We talked about water. We talked about animals. We talked about music.
Yes. And I'll add one last thing before we end, which is contribution. And I don't mean just money. What I mean is that sometimes, depends on the situation, if there's something going on in the world that you want to be involved with in some way, go do that. If there's a way to contribute your time, if there's a way to contribute anything at all, when you are part of something bigger, you get the memo that doesn't always go out to everyone. And here's what the memo says. The memo says that when you give and when you donate and when you contribute, you usually get more out of it than the people that you meant to have something. So it's also very grounding and very humbling and, very human. So, and we also send our, best thoughts always and our compassion to anybody who is suffering, but certainly any of the folks that are suffering in the LA fires, any of the folks in the Middle East, many, many different parts of the world. So, we send certainly our best thoughts.
Thank you, Jenny.
Thank you, Nina. See everybody soon.
Bye.
We're so glad you joined us on this episode of Body Peace.
Stay connected as we continue exploring what it means to live in your body with more ease, trust, and care by subscribing to Body Peace on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube, or wherever you listen.
Be sure to visit us at bodypeacepodcast.com for special bonus content for those on our mailing list.